It finally happened. I knew it was going to happen. Everybody should have known it was going to happen. Because there is one constant in European football over the last couple of years. There is going to be at least one team from somewhere that is going to go on up to the Arctic Circle, maybe in January if you've got to play those January matches, and it is really cold. And they're going to get played like bongos by Bodo Glimt, who continue to be one of the great stories of European football. In case you missed it, Bodo Glimt just ran it up against Manchester City. I mean, leathered them. 2 goals in the first 24 minutes. And this is a Manchester City team that was not super watered down. I mean, the starting lineup of the front three was Foden, Haaland, Cherki. You had Rodri. You had Rico Lewis. I love Rico Lewis. Ait Nouri. Right? And there were, of course, some guys that maybe you didn't necessarily recognize, like this guy, whose name didn't check out for me. A guy named Allen, Max Allen. Max Allen was responsible for a lot of the goals that ended up being allowed in this particular case. I kind of feel bad for him. And if I had to guess, this is going to incentivize Pep Guardiola to rotate even less than he already does. But Bodo Glimt jumped on this early. And the whole story, like, this has caused me to do a little deep dive on Bodo Glimt because I knew the story, but I didn't really know the story, that situation. And so I decided to actually go and do some light reading to learn about how unbelievable what they're accomplishing is, about how ridiculous it is that they've been able to accomplish it. But here's the first goal. Okay, 21st minute, you've got Erling Haaland playing in his home nation. He's just qualified Norway for a World Cup. It's a homecoming for the Norwegian king against Norway's best team, which that is a new development that Bodo Glimt's even Norway's best team. And then all of a sudden, the ball goes this direction. That Allen guy, Max Allen, comes flying like he's shot out of a cannon, misses the ball, and here comes Bodo Glimt. They're bringing the ball down the side. It looks like maybe a foul. No, guy gets up, plays right through it, chips it to the far side. Hogue is there. 22nd minute, Bodo Glimt jumps out to a lead. Kasper Hogue, who is the striker for Bodo Glimt, he's been the striker for years now, getting his first goal. And then 2 minutes later, they get another one. And unfortunately, it comes out of this situation. This is, audio, scary. DMCA monsters are going to impresses me about this team. Every time I watch them lay hands on people up in Norway is how technically good they are. You watch them play on the road, you do not see the same level of technique, but they are precise and technical. This is like what those random articles about the North Korean clubs that are doing rondos and impressing everybody, where you're like, I don't know how applicable that technique is. And clearly sometimes Bodo Glimt goes on the road and they'll get beat pretty badly. Right? It's not like this Champions League has been all roses for Bodo Glimt. But by the way, first ever Champions League appearance for Bodo Glimt. Right? They have been losing. They've been losing a lot. They even lost to Sturm Graz in the playoff. Sturm Graz isn't very good right now. But there's a difference. I don't really know how to explain it exactly. There's a difference. There's a swagger to the way Bodo Glimt is able to beat teams when they come up to the Arctic Circle. And so far, that difference, that swagger had not appeared yet in the Champions League. But like I was saying, we should have known it was on the way. Manchester City was maybe sleepwalking into this match. Okay, they're sitting there thinking, well, all we need really here is a draw to put us in a really good position to get a top 8 finish in the Champions League. And of course, you want the top 8 because you don't want to have to go through that extra playoff round. But now they're in the second half. They're down 2-0. They can't find anything. King Rodri's fresh off a torn ACL, turning the ball over again in the midfield. This is moments before disaster for him as he's headed towards a red card. And then Jens Petter Hauge, the superstar for Bodo Glimt, just takes a driving run. And I mean, what are you going to do with that? If you let him make that driving run into the middle of the field, how are you going to stop that? And listen to the crowd pops, by the way, on these sorts of moments. This is a great atmosphere just outside. There is a real lively kind of I want to say English League One type of atmosphere. They're very on top of you. It's small enough to be intimate, right? You're having individual interactions with fans. It's not some giant faceless stadium here. It is a long trip. You're in the middle of nowhere. It's cold. The field, however, is pristine. These guys are used to not only the cold, but the artificial turf that they play on up there. And they are technical. And they punish mistakes. And if you give them opportunities, they will take them. In their first ever Champions League, this goes down rather hilariously. This is your fun banter stat if you wanted one from this match. The first ever Champions League win in Bodo Glimt history. It now leaves them, at 6 points after 7 matches. They had 3 draws and 3 defeats coming into this. It's not like they hadn't been competitive. They just struggled to defend away from home. Their previous match was a draw against Dortmund away, 2-2. So they finally got the scalp that they needed. Took longer than I thought. And their first ever Champions League win comes at the expense of Manchester City, who is now going to be sitting there right on the line going into the final match day at home against Galatasaray, a match that if they win, they're very likely in the top 8. But they have now put the pressure on themselves to have to go do that after what was an embarrassing display. They got their goal right before the red card for Rodri, who has been terrible since his return as somebody that has torn my own ACL. It's going to take him a little time, if ever, to get back to where he was. And they, I don't believe, have won a match since he returned to the starting 11. So that he's not going to be returning again, at least to a European starting 11 for a little bit, because he just got sent off. So that is a herald of woe, perhaps, for Manchester City. But my favorite part of this story, now that we've gotten the logistical stuff out of the way about Bodo Glimt just absolutely abusing Manchester City, 3-0 in the second half is just incredible. I mean, maybe Pep Guardiola didn't have enough warmth on the top of his head in order to keep all the thoughts in. That's my working theory. Here's the fun part. In 2017, this team was in the second division of Norway. They won it pretty convincingly after getting relegated the season before. They'd spent a total of 3 seasons in the top flight. This was a rather heartbreaking relegation. They lost a bunch of matches in a row to barely go down. They get back up in 2017. In 2018, they finished 11th. Going into the 2019 season, according to what I can find, they were picked as one of the relegation favorites after selling some of their favored players. Think about this. This is the year before the COVID-19 outbreak. The team Bodo Glimt, who feels like a European regular at this point, is favored for relegation. They're one of the pundits' favorites to be relegated from the top flight of Norway. Instead, they show up and finish second. Then they win their first 2 league titles ever while getting into the Conference League stage, or the Conference League group stage it was at the time, and then getting into the Europa League. And of course, making a miraculous Europa League run all the way to the semifinals. That was last year where they got all the way up against Tottenham Hotspur. I mean, here's what kind of blew my mind, right? As they get to the quarterfinals of the Conference League in 21-22. This is the first time I ever heard of Bodo Glimt, was in this season, right? Because they didn't make, this is the first time they ever got into a group stage of anything. It was Conference League all the way after losing in the Champions League first qualifying round against Legia Warsaw 5-2 on aggregate. This is the year they beat Roma 6-1. They beat Roma 6-1 in 2021. That is 2 years after they managed to finish in the top 2 of the top league for the first time. What Bodo Glimt has done is even more remarkable than perhaps I realized. Right? I thought that they had been building this up for longer than they had been previously. Right? I love what Mjällby was able to do in Sweden, but Bodo Glimt came out of nowhere to become not only the best team in Norway, which they haven't necessarily even consistently been that. Right? They finished second in the league in 2022. Right now, they're trying to finish first in the league. I think they might have not won the league this year, because this league it's a summer league, right? So it would be done. They're playing in January. Bodo Glimt didn't even win the league this year. Viking won it by a point. So Bodo Glimt's not even consistently winning the league, and yet what they're able to go and do in Europe consistently. The first time they ever make a European group stage in the Conference League, they get all the way to the quarterfinals, losing to Roma 5-2 on aggregate after. They beat Roma both times they played them at home. It's unbelievable. They knocked out Celtic. They knocked out AZ. Then they get all the way to the Champions League playoffs and make the Europa Conference League knockouts in their next season. The season after that, they once again make the knockouts of the Conference League. That's 3 straight Conference League knockout trips for this club. And then obviously the Europa League semifinal run that sees them beat Twente, Olympiacos, Lazio to get through a league phase with, favorable results against Porto and Braga. And now they get into the Champions League for the first time in club history, and they beat one of the giants of European football, Manchester City. They've drawn Tottenham. They've drawn Dortmund. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable what these guys are doing. I mean, the same as the situation with Mjällby in Sweden, where a team comes out of nowhere to win the league, and we'll see how they do in Europe, obviously. People at Bodo Glimt need to be getting hired away. Players at Bodo Glimt need to be getting signed away. It's happened some, but in my opinion, not enough. If you're looking for people that have solved the riddle of team building in the face of teams that are much richer and much more attractive destinations, if you're looking for somebody that has the ability to develop talent that can then compete at a world-class level, even the matches they're losing, you lose to Monaco, by a goal. Lose to Juventus, by a goal, right? They're so in it and competitive in these moments. They're elevating the entirety of the Norwegian league. They're feeding players into the Norwegian national team. Jens Petter Hauge, they're creating guys that are known to, sickos like me that play Football Manager and everything, but also, Manchester City fans watching this guy drop. I've watched him score braces against big European teams before, Jens Petter Hauge, and he does it with quality. They're the 40th biggest club in UEFA, according to the UEFA club rankings. Their coefficient is higher than Olympiacos and Lyon, just as what I can see on this screen. It's remarkable. And even though it felt to me going into this video and going into this Champions League that it was inevitable that Bodo Glimt was going to take a scalp. Who it was, I didn't know. But they had the home matches against Tottenham, Monaco, Juventus, and Man City. Somebody's going up there and losing. It turns out to be Manchester City. It was nearly Tottenham as well. If you remember that match, it was a while ago. But the fact that that is an assumption that I can have going into this Champions League season, and that assumption is then proven right, is a sign of how ridiculous this is. And obviously, you continue winning, you continue performing like this, more and more of that money is going to be flowing in. Now they're on the road against Atletico Madrid. I don't necessarily trust them on the road as much, but they got that random draw against Dortmund. If they win at Atletico Madrid, they could backdoor a Champions League knockout, which they probably are due for one, considering every single time they've made it at least to the group stage of a European competition, they have made the knockouts. They have never been eliminated in a group or league stage, ever. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. Bodo Glimt is for real, baby!